everyone. Welcome back to the Roble Ventures video series on how to launch, build, and fund your new startup. I'm Marina Glazman, and I'm back here with Sergio Monsalve, founding partner at Roble Ventures. Welcome back, Sergio.
Thanks, Marina. It's so great to be back with you, prospective entrepreneurs. Today, we're going to talk about competition, and I'm very excited about that talk.
We've been talking about your product, your people, your market, and now we're looking at competition. So we want to understand how to assess the competitive landscape and also understand how your product is differentiated from competitors and substitutes. But as a first step, let's go kind of macro. So competitive landscape is something you've probably seen all kinds of models for when entrepreneurs are pitching you, I would imagine. I'd love to hear what you see as the biggest challenge entrepreneurs have when it comes to thinking through their competition.
Yeah, the thing that I think about is introspection. I think the entrepreneurs that I meet that do well in this exercise, thinking about their competition, are folks that are very introspective. They think about not only the direct competitors, which are easier to identify, but also think about substitutes, indirect competitors, incumbents. And that's very important because that allows you to see the whole 360 view of your market. In addition, I think what we'll talk about is how sustainability and community have become such forms of competitive advantage for many great companies.
So to kick off the discussion, let's look at the key elements of a competitive landscape. What do people need to understand about how competitive dynamics shape your chance of getting off the ground as a new startup?
Well, Marina, for this analysis, I like to use a framework called the 4 or 5 forces. This is a framework that was invented a long time ago, in 1979, by a professor at Harvard whose name is Michael Porter. So he invented this framework, and why it's important in this context is because it allows an entrepreneur to view the whole 360 look of their whole landscape and potentially all the pressuring points that they could have. So let me give you an example. It's let's say that you're creating an online school and you have an online school. You have pressures from your suppliers. So your suppliers could be content providers, teachers. It could be the material providers for your schooling. It could be on the buyer side and consumer side. You could have parents. You could have people that are, the students themselves could be the buyers of your product, or maybe school districts are buying it. And there's pressure that they put on your product as well, on your offering. Number 3 is the threat of new entrants. Players perhaps that are doing things differently, that are coming into your space. Maybe they're using new technologies like AI or VR or AR. And so they could outflank you. And the last one is threat of substitutes. And substitutes could be no schooling, could be work-study programs, homeschooling. It could be just watching YouTube videos and doing nothing but that.
When I think of substitutes, I think almost any other activity could potentially be a substitute for something like school, right? Especially if you're talking about younger students who may not always want to study.
Yeah, absolutely. Apathy is an absolute alternative to studying, especially things like Netflix could be a great substitute for that type of offering.
Got it. So what's the last force that we have here in the middle?
Yeah, the last force is the one in the middle. And that's the most direct competitors that you can find. Those are usually the easiest ones to identify because they're the ones that pester you the most, the ones that you have to message and build against directly. They're the ones that are immediate threats. Think about Coke versus Pepsi, right? Now, if you think of Coke versus Red Bull's probably more considered a new entrant to Coke, and they came at it from a different direction. But in the middle, you should always consider the ones that are right in the periphery of your direct competition.
Okay, so how do these forces exert pressure onto your business?
So the way I think about it is that there's a framework to use here on the levers that you could apply to the 5 forces in order to know what to do. These are perhaps a good framework to use here as a 4Ps of marketing. So how you price your product, how you promote your product, how you actually build the product, and then finally how to distribute it, how you place it. So as you think about these 4 levers, you can take real inventory and how these levers can help you outflank these forces that are putting pressure on your business. I'll give you a few examples. One is how you price your product may be prohibitive against the competition that is maybe underselling you, right? Selling it too low. Or how you build a product and how it attracts certain alternatives could be built differently so that you would actually beat other competitors. Think of web products versus mobile native products, right? It's a different way to build a product and offer the service. Or how you distribute the product. Some offerings are B2B, of other offerings are B2C. That's a different way to distribute the product. Finally, how you promote it is incredibly interesting. I think of the campaign Verizon had, which is, "Can you hear me now?" It's an interesting way to position themselves against the competition where you can't hear them that well, right? So it's a great way to do it.
Yeah, I remember that Verizon commercial definitely stays with you. One thing I hear a lot from early stage entrepreneurs, and I'd love to get your take on this because I'm sure you hear it all the time, but I hear people say, "I don't have any competitors. Nobody does what we do." So how do you respond to that?
Yes, absolutely. That's precisely why I think it's important to use this framework because oftentimes what I hear is we do not have competitors, but that what they really mean is, hey, we may not have a direct, exact competitor. But in reality, when you look at the broader landscape and you look at this 5 forces, you will identify some real pressures around your ecosystem. And that's important.
Yeah. So you also mentioned community and environment, but the 5 forces model doesn't seem to directly address this. Where does that concept fit in?
Well, the 5 forces were invented in 1979. Today, we live in a much different world. So I would urge Mr. Michael Porter to include a 6th force. And in my mind, this 6th force includes community and environment. That's a source of competitive advantage. That's also a pressure that it's applied to businesses. And you should consider them in this model. Some people talk about equity, sustainability, and governance, ESG. I think it should be part of this discussion, and I think it should be the 6th force.
It seems like more companies are thinking about that these days. Is there a good example that comes to mind for you?
Well, when I think about this, I think of Mark Benioff and how he's made the community and sustainability as a key competitive advantage for him. Mark Benioff, the founder and CEO of Salesforce, is the #1 employer in San Francisco. And we know that San Francisco has gone through major changes over the last 10 to 20 years, if not more. They're challenged, but I think Mark has stepped up, become a leader, and really used some of his profits to feed it back to the community and to feed it back to the environment. And I think that's very commendable. And that's actually good business for him because that's become a real competitive advantage for him.
Good. So let's get into the frameworks that an entrepreneur should be putting together in their pitch to a venture fund. What is the best way to explain to an investor how your product is differentiated from your competition?
Yeah, the first framework and the one that I see used a lot in venture pitches is the 2x2. The 2x2 is very helpful in if you have a simple 2-dimensional way to show your advantage against the competition. In this case, I have Airbnb on the screen here. And the way they chose in their first pitch to describe their service is that they were more affordable on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, their online offering versus offline competitors. So they clearly picked those 2 dimensions in a very simple way. And because they understood that those were truly big dimensions, they ended up competing very effectively and pitching very effectively. When you build a 2x2, I think the most important thing is to go back to how, if you're a David, a new startup coming into the ecosystem, how you're going to actually pick those 2 dimensions to compete against Goliath. So you have to pick a new playing field. And that's why the 2x2 is so powerful, because if you pick the right ones, and oftentimes people don't, but when you do, then it becomes a very powerful way to kind of change the landscape and win the game and win the market.
So one thing that comes to mind is, what if you don't have clear differentiation across 2 dimensions? Let's say that instead of building or inventing something totally new, that the goal of your product is to aggregate features of other existing products or services and to compete on the basis of reinventing a whole process, for example?
Yeah, Marina, that's a really good point. I don't think you need to be limited to 2x2s. In fact, you could do 3, 4, 5, 6 dimensions by using a framework that I also like to use that's a little bit more complex called the PETAL framework. In this example, I think of Slack. So Slack is an offering that competes in various dimensions, in 6 in their case. And so what they were able to do is to map those out and put themselves in the middle. And that's pretty effective when you're actually trying to convey that you provide various different offerings. And in the middle, you offer convenience, you use ease of use, easier communications. And that's what they're actually trying to convey here. Business communications, task management, united communications, collaboration, file sharing are kind of their things that they do, but they do it in a much easier way. So if you really think about Slack's secret sauce, it's not just cemented on one dimension, but it's in the notion that you could actually provide these 6 different offerings in a much more convenient way, from business communications to united communications, collaboration, file sharing, task management. They together make it so seamless that it really has reshaped an ecosystem rather than just inventing along one dimension. And that's the magic of Slack.
Very cool. So we looked at Porter's 5 forces, updating it with community and environment metrics, and we also talked through the 2x2 competitive matrix and the PETAL framework. So that's a summary of what we did today. But what final thoughts do you have, if any, for entrepreneurs as we wrap with competition?
Yeah, in today's video, we looked at the notion that entrepreneurs need to be introspective and observant, but at a macro level. Think about the whole landscape that they're operating under. But if you think about other videos we've done, we've also asked entrepreneurs to be very introspective at a micro level, be empathetic to the customer, be also very observant about the needs that the customer has. So the interesting thing is that we've asked entrepreneurs to be much live in the world of inches, in nanometers, all the way up to the abstraction of miles, right? So they need to have what we call in venture capital altitude management. You need to be very granular and also very global and have that ability to move up and down. In addition, you need to have the ability to kind of look at the past, look at the present, and predict the future. And that's an important thing for entrepreneurs to have. But that's what's so exciting about being an entrepreneur. You get to navigate different worlds and different dimensions. And that to me is the exciting part of it.
Great. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please stay subscribed and check your alerts for our next videos coming up on business models.